Divided Trinity. Amen. This fourth Sunday of Easter is popularly known as Good Shepherd Sunday. And that is in reference to the verse from the first letter of Peter that we heard this morning saying, "For you were straying like sheep, but now you have returned to the shepherd and guardian of your souls." And also to the fact that often on this Sunday, the gospel reading from John is the passage where Jesus actually identifies himself as the Good Shepherd. We didn't hear that gospel this morning. It was from John, but it was another passage where Jesus identified himself as the gate to the sheep. And that probably isn't as popular as the Good Shepherd image, maybe because we don't like to think of Jesus as an inanimate object, but it is there. And in fact, if we look closely at John's gospel, we see that first and foremost, Jesus is identified as a sheep himself. Remember back to the beginning of John's gospel, John the Baptist is with his disciples, with his own disciples, and he looks out and sees Jesus and says, "Behold what? The Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world." Now, we tend to think of sheep as these sort of stinky, dumb beasts who are forever lost without a shepherd. And so we always connote ourselves in the derogatory sheep form and think of Jesus as the exalted shepherd. But John's gospel makes it clear to us that first and foremost, we must remember that Jesus is a sheep. The spotless lamb without blemish, to be sure, but one of the sheep. Now, it is true that sheep need care and protection, so Jesus is not just one of the sheep. He is also the gateway to safety for all the other sheep. And in this passage that we just heard, he says, "For truly I say to you, I am the gate for the sheep. And those who come through me find safety. And they come in and they go out and find pasture." In fact, he says, "I come that they might have life and have it abundantly." So Jesus is the sheep, and Jesus is the gate for the sheep. And yes, Jesus is also the shepherd. The shepherd loves the sheep and cares for them. The sheep know the shepherd, we are told in this gospel, because he calls them by name. And they recognize his voice. And you know, we're still so close to the Easter feast, it's not hard to remember that marvelous Easter gospel wherein the hitherto unrecognized Lord speaks to Mary Magdalene, calling her by name. And it's not until Mary recognizes Jesus' voice saying to her, "Mary," that her eyes are opened and she sees the risen Lord. So the shepherd's love is particular and it's intimate. But the shepherd's love is also universal. For the good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep, all of the sheep, even those that are not of this fold. And that sometimes is hard for us to grasp and accept. We love the particularity of Christ's love, that our names are on his lips. But often we think or wish that it is only our names that are on his lips. We love our shepherd and want to make sure that our relationship with him is unique. And so we often find comfort in the image of the shepherd separating the sheep from the goats. Remember that parable, don't you? The sheep, of course, we think of as those of the household of faith, including ourselves. And the goats, we tend to think of those of other faiths or no faith or questionable faith. And this is a real temptation that the church has struggled with throughout the millennium. And we know that the church has struggled with it because, in fact, the early church has left what I consider to be a wonderful little sermon in the form of a drawing. In the catacombs of Rome, and a number of St. John's folks went there on a parish pilgrimage a few years ago. In the catacombs, the second and third century Christians often drew very crude representations of Christians' symbols on the walls. And one of the recurring themes that are very much prevalent at that time was the image of Christ as the good shepherd who lays down his life for the sheep. And normally in the drawings there, Christ would be standing and the sheep would be around him, and on his shoulders he would be carrying a lamb. People have seen that, haven't they? It's as prevalent today in Christian symbology as it was almost 2,000 years ago. Well, in the catacomb of Priscilla, there was discovered such a drawing on this motif, but it was a little different than all the rest. It shows Christ standing in the midst of all these sheep, and on his shoulders he's carrying a goat. That is an amazing image, friends, and it speaks volumes. The early church, in the midst of being persecuted and forced into hiding, recognized